Here's a movie I didn't think I was going to see again after 2010, but here we are. So, back then, they decided they were going to do another adaptation of Gulliver's Travels, and I'm only vaguely familiar with the Jonathan Swift source material that's like really lengthy and really sweeping, but I am familiar with I saw the 1939 animated movie as a kid, and I just remember the animation kind of creeped me out a little bit. And also, when I was a kid, that when it initially aired, I remember seeing just like bits and pieces of the miniseries with Ted Danson. So for the 2010 version, somebody was like, why don't we get the star and writer of Forgetting Sarah Marshall, as well as the director of that movie, to co-write it, only we're going to make it a dopey kids movie starring Jack Black. I'm not sure how the meetings for this totally went, but I almost feel like this was probably going to be an entirely different movie at one point before they really toned it down. But I guess we'll never know. So, going into this, they're obviously, like I said, they are going for like a more kid-friendly, family-friendly sort of vibe, despite the fact that there might be a bit of confusion there as far as like it feels like they want to go a little farther, but it also feels like they're kind of limited to the PG rating. Like for instance, I mean, just little trivial things like when he's on the boat just before he crashes, and he's surrounded by cans of Coke, and it's like I feel like if this was any other Jack Black movie, just about any other Jack Black movie, those would have been cans of beer or something. So it just then it almost feels like a censored version of what it probably could have been or was going to be at one point. But then you balance that out with stuff like at some point Joe LaTrulla is going to end up his ass. So there's that. There's the scene when Emily Blunt is trying to convince Chris O'Dowd that there's no love in their relationship. So she says, "Name one thing you love about me," and he points to her tits. PG family-friendly movie. Then there's the whole thing with like the dead pirate skeleton in that girl's dollhouse, which is just sort of even if they were going for a darker movie at one point in that state, and it's like, what the fuck were you thinking, writers? But we'll go back a little bit to the beginning before he's even on the island. And the first sort of mistake that they make is setting up this sort of very generic plot to introduce us to the character of Gulliver, where it's just another one of those, he's the ignored guy in the office, and his career's at a dead end, he has no friends, and he's got the crush on the girl that barely knows he exists, who is Amanda Peet. And there's just really nothing here. Like, it's just really that basic from the get-go. So you kind of already have this feeling in your stomach like that. I don't know how well this is going to go. Maybe it'll get a little better when he's actually stranded on an island with a bunch of small people. But right now it's really hard to say. We get a little bit of foreshadowing that's not so subtle, like when he's playing Guitar Hero and he has the oversized glasses, or when he's trying to write the paper for Amanda Peet and he's got the oversized pencil. I guess that's supposed to be clever in a way or something, but the thing that does kind of, keep your interest afloat throughout this, regardless of your doubts, is the fact that it's got an opening title sequence, and when you watch this, you realize that this movie has an amazing cast. Because on top of Jack Black being the star, you've got Emily Blunt, of course, you've got Jason Segel, you've got Chris O'Dowd, one of my favorite people, Billy Connolly, James Corden, obviously Amanda Peet, I said. It's also got T.J. Miller, and that's one of those. He's like the one. He's like the oddity. It's like you're watching the opening titles, and you're like, not only T.J. Miller may not be funny in the absolute slightest, but to his credit, just the implication that he's worthy enough to be on this cast list with Emily Blunt, let alone everybody else here, that's fucking hilarious. So we'll give him that. But as it goes on, once he finally does get to the island is when we pretty much meet most of this cast. So it's like, okay, so there is going to be at least a little hope. One of the first people we meet is Chris O'Dowd, which is a good start, who's playing our villain. which he does seem to be having a bit of fun with. I'd completely forgotten he was in this. I kept thinking the first thing I saw him in was Bridesmaids, but I guess not, because this was the year before. So, anyway, and the way he sort of goes after some material that may not necessarily be particularly funny or particularly good, like when they're in the cave and they do the lame-ass bit. Just the way he, like, totally goes for it and sells that as much as he possibly can makes them get through it and makes the bit not entirely fall flat. So I do really appreciate that. It really helps the cast they were able to get for this thing. Even James Corden does a couple of things here that I like when he's the one that's tasked with talking to Gulliver a lot of the time. But he does like those sort of like that aggressive throat clearing before he has to yell. And he just sort of kind of pops in and out, but kind of seems like he just kind of disappears after a while. But everybody else here is, I think, doing the best with what they can. Like I said, it seems to be like, it's not like people are sleepwalking through it or anything, which might be what you kind of expect from a cast of this caliber in a movie like this. But I mean, people like Billy Connolly don't really get too much to work with. It's like they seem perfect for the role, but then it's like once they're in the role, it's like they didn't really decide to do anything more with that. So that's unfortunate. But then you get people like we're introduced to the Emily Blunt character, who is basically just here to be the love interest for Jason Segel, who he has to win over, despite the fact that it seems impossible because he's just sort of a lowly dude and she's royalty and is being forced into a marriage with Chris O'Dowd, with very obvious and predictable complications, of course. Stuff that you would expect in a children's movie of this caliber, which is, you know, harmless enough, but she is able to squeeze, you know, some life out of this character anyway. Like the way she just sort of seems so oblivious to everything, and how like anything when like everything Gulliver is saying, he's like so clearly full of shit. But the way she just like looks on at him with like awe as she like takes this in and just believes every second of it and is riveted by what he is and believes that he's like this, like she's the one where she says, of course he's the president wherever he came from, because that's just who he is. It does make the character very charming in a way that probably would have been much more just sort of a flat, completely devoid of personality character with any other actress, really. I mean, it is worth noting also that this isn't something that I really wanted to go into with this segment. I've been trying to dance around it a little bit, but I suppose at the risk of coming off like a complete tool, I will just mention it really quickly now, and that is because in this movie it's very hard to ignore. It's the fact that obviously, despite the fact that she's also the incredible actress that she is, Emily Blunt is also an extremely beautiful woman on top of that. And it's one of those cases where, like I said, in this movie, it's a little harder to ignore than it is in other cases, because it's like, there are moments where, and it does, dumb as this sounds, and as much of an excuse as it sounds, it does sort of fit the character a little bit, where the character has to be like that sort of unobtainable woman to Jason Segel, where she's literally all the way up here in a balcony and he's all the way down here. And it's like, God. It's like there's a point in time where she's on the balcony and just the way she's shot and the way she looks, it's like the earth stops moving for a second. So that I felt is kind of the standout thing. It kind of sucks that she doesn't get more to work with than basically just that. But like I said, she does do the most of what she can, but that is worth noting while we're mentioning it. So that's what I'll say about that. But then going on that also, the scenes where the characters have to basically, like I said, buy into his bullshit. And as it continues to snowball into a bigger and bigger lie, like when he starts to reenact his life story, but he's reenacting famous movies like The Empire Strikes Back or Titanic. And it's kind of funny when, by the time they get to Titanic, Chris O'Dowd's able to start calling him out on it. But when they're watching The Empire Strikes Back unfold, and it's supposed to be his life story, and it's like the way Blunt and the Queen interact, where it's like, when it gets to the I am your father thing, and it's like, it seems impossible yet inevitable, and something like that. There's something charmingly funny in that. as is the scene with the whole Jason Segel thing. Also, I talked about before in the other movie they did together how likable Jason Segel is, regardless of the movie he's in. And this one's really no exception either. This character could have been just sort of like the scene he really seems to sort of come out and really show the character off is the Cyrano scene with the music lyrics. And it's, once again, I mean, it's kind of a dopey scene, but there's still something sort of inherently charming about it, too, that you can't help but like. And I think that has a lot to do with how Segel plays it. But once again, though, there's, like I said, it almost seems like the comedy's like limited. Like, they almost kind of wanted to go farther with it, but they could only go so much content-wise, like what the studio wanted or whatever. But there's also the storylines as well, which you wouldn't think should really matter too much here. Like, if this is all they're gonna do in regards to the source material, then they pretty much have a concept on their hands if they want to make some big comedy or whatever. But there are a couple of storylines into it. The whole Amanda Peet thing, like I said, probably because they just needed the simplest, laziest plot in order to motivate him to be out here at all. The whole Bermuda Triangle thing, which he seems to go into with an alarming ease. So it's like, it sort of expects us to care about this conflict long after it's been left behind, once he reaches the island. And it's like, they try to bring that back in just the most mundane way possible with the voicemails that she leaves him. And it's like, because of this, because it basically feels like a whole portion of the movie is missing, because this story we're supposed to care about is happening off-screen in an entirely different land and really doesn't matter much. I mean, sure, he relates to Jason Segel, thus helping Jason Segel get to Blunt, while also sort of finding that in himself as Segel finds it. They're trying to do something with that. I don't know how well it's coming through, though, but yeah, it's really, the Pete thing just feels like something they could have taken out entirely. They could have done so many other things with the Gulliver character. I'm sure Jack Black definitely could have sold just about anything, but they just went with something so lazy and so average. It's just that simple. But honestly, that would make it. It would almost make it much worse if they took it out entirely. But the thing is that it's Amanda Peet, and we've seen the amazing things she's done before. You forget she's even in the movie after a while, which makes it even more eye-roll inducing when they shoehorn her back in to the ending. And of course, Chris O'Dowd has to take her hostage, and they do that whole thing, and it just kind of gets worse as it goes. And then it also doesn't help. This is probably something I could have mentioned earlier. The effects kind of fail miserably in a lot of cases. Every now and then it looks decent, but overall it's like not only are the effects not that great, but they sort of undermine the performances also. And by performances, I don't necessarily mean like there's anything Oscar-worthy here, but like the way the actors like so convincingly talk to what we know on the set is nothing. Because obviously Blunt or Segel or whoever has to be looking up at giant Jack Black, and Jack Black has to be looking down at the seemingly tiny them. And you kind of believe they're talking to each other, but you could believe it more if it didn't look like a whole bunch of shitty green screen and a whole bunch of really bad CGI. Like the scene when he crosses the water and goes up to their ships, or when they're under attack. It's just like, it's like the animation's incomplete. It really does not look good at all. And maybe I could almost buy it's sort of like, I don't know, there's like a charm to that, to where it almost looks like it's supposed to look really shoddy. I'm not quite sure how to explain that, or why I'm thinking that could work if it was maybe the intention. But I think it just comes down to the fact that it's shitty effects, and there's really no other way to look into it. And just the way and all that stuff just attempts to blend together is not working. So that's a pretty big standout in a movie that has to be so effects heavy to accomplish the look of what's going on, what the main story is. The fact that you have shitty effects is kind of a big obstacle that you probably is one of the first things you needed to jump, and you just ran right the fuck into it. So that's unfortunate, but it also it has a bit of a dated vibe to it, particularly with not just the humor but some of the references too, like when they're like when obviously there's going to be movie references because that's how he claims like he's comparing what his life is, and then they as you can see on the cover, they replace all the movie posters or the TV posters with his face, and they change the titles to not so subtly work in his name or whatever, successfully or otherwise. But it's like stuff that was like out at that time that nobody would really be referencing now. You could argue that with Avatar, but then there's stuff like one of the posters is X-Men Origins. It's like I don't think anybody except Ryan Reynolds is going to be referencing that, and he's going to run that shit on the ground, as we know. But and it's worth noting, you got Avatar and you've got X-Men Origins. It's like, how convenient. They're both 20th Century Fox movies. Sort of like this one. So maybe that's how those choices came about, but still make the movie look very dated. And then also there's just like these major inconsistencies with the island itself, like the way they speak. Like sometimes it seems like they're doing that like official like old Victorian era style English, and then sometimes it just sounds modern. And you could probably argue that maybe it changes due to Gulliver's influence. I don't think the movie is subtle enough for that to be the case. Where it's like if that were the case, like if that was going to be a whole thing where Gulliver influences the way they speak, then we'd be seeing people in like royal attire making like Jack Black noises or whatever, which we don't get, probably for the better. And I guess sometimes we do get like Horatio calls her like a stone cold fox, and they say awesome and stuff like that. And to its credit, when Blunt knocks out Chris O'Dowd and does her boosh thing, is probably one of the greatest things to ever happen in the history of the world. But overall, it does seem like there's an unevenness there. Like, I guess with all those examples, you could kind of say maybe I'm losing the point, and maybe I should just give this to them. But then there's also like there are a couple of scenes, particularly like in Blunt's chambers, or when she's like on the balcony or whatever, and it's like in throughout, like it's hard to tell like what era this island is stuck in. That's probably in the source material somewhere, but the movie never. This movie's never going to go into that much. But they seem to be in a much older era. So they dress as such and they speak as such. They've got, obviously, Blunt's in like the costumes that seem like she dragged off the set of the Young Victoria. But then there's a couple of scenes where the way she's dressed is like weirdly modern, almost like they like called her and told her to show up for a non-dress rehearsal, and they were like, oh fuck it, we should just film this, and that just stayed in there. It's really kind of weird, and just kind of shows how shoddily put together the whole movie feels, that on top of the effects, on top of the inconsistencies, all that stuff. And then eventually, it gets to the point towards the end where there's like a whole other act when it seems like it should be ending, and it's when Jack Black gets stuck in the doll's house, and it's like they really had nothing to go on with this. They were just basically dragging and stretching it out so it could reach feature length. So it was like, okay, so what do we do with this? How about we put Jack Black in a dress, and then voila, for the next 10 minutes, that's the joke. Jack Black's wearing a dress. The end. Until we finally bring the whole Amanda P thing full circle, which they somehow find a way to introduce a giant robot into the climax of this thing. It's ridiculous. So, with all that said about a movie like this, you're probably thinking, am I overthinking it? Am I picking this movie apart way too seriously? Probably. But the thing is like, you can do something this silly and this easy to digest, but you can put a lot more effort into it. You can be a lot more clever about it, and this movie seemed to have, like, no interest in this. It's like they they got the idea and they got super excited about it for a while, but then halfway through pre-production they were like, I don't know anymore. And then it's just like, well, here it is. And that's what every aspect feels like. It's just like, whether it be the writing or the designs and all that, the effects, it's like, just here, we give up. We give up halfway through. There was an idea here, but it's gone now. So when I talked about the 5-year engagement, I hinted at the idea that if that's not her worst movie, then this one is. I mean, yeah, this one probably is. You could probably almost say objectively, but like I'm very close to saying that. But yeah, but I mean, still, it's not as bad as I remembered it being in 2010. I will say that. There are things that I do find funny, which is more than I can say that I did 8 years ago. But I mean, still, it seems like they really were trying to do something else with this, and then just. I don't know what the hell happened. What we see it as it is now can't possibly have been the original idea, especially when you look at everybody involved. So I don't know, but here we are. You might notice it's a bit odd. This is the only one of these I have in a Blu-ray case. Obviously, it's the DVD combo pack, and this was weirdly enough the cheapest way I could find it. And you better believe if I'm going to be purchasing the Gulliver's Travels starring Jack Black, it's going to be the cheapest one I can possibly fucking find. So, there we have that. So, we're going to continue on with this. I can't remember which one is next. Actually, if it's the one I think it is, we're going in a totally different direction. So, we'll see what that is. So, until that,